Kind of.
Okay. First of all, I'm going to apologize to him because I was mispronouncing his name. I am really excited. So a lot of you know I took an old camera and had it converted for infrared, and I think it's so cool, but I need to learn a lot more about how to do it. So selfishly, I've got Byron Capo here to teach me and bringing you all along with me about infrared.
Mm-hmm.
Byron.
Awesome. Thank you.
And you can correct your name.
Yes, it's Byron Capo. Just Capo. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much. Just a little brief history about myself. I've been shooting now since 1990 something and other. As I heard a comedian say the other day, I'm from the 1900s, which I think most of the people in this room fit that category, which is kind of cool. And I started off, like many of you, in film and progressed into digital world, and have actually now come full circle, and about 85% of the work that I do now is back in film again. I do a lot of glass plate, I do a lot of infrared film, and then I've really branched out and I do a lot of alternative printing, as they call it now. But today I want to talk to you about infrared. I will also tell you I'm the past president of the St. Augustine Camera Club. That was a few years ago when we first got started. And I remember starting that club with 5 ladies around a dinner table. And it turned out to be an incredible organization. And I was fortunate enough to be from secretary, treasurer, vice president, president, and all the way through that. So it was really fun to be a part of that organization. About 2006, 7, somewhere in that neighborhood, I was looking for something else to do other than the photography that I was producing. I wanted to branch out. I wanted to try something that would set my work apart. And I stumbled upon digital infrared. Well, back in the days of early film, we had infrared film, and it was true infrared film, and I actually cut my teeth on probably about a dozen rolls as I was still learning to shoot photography, and it quickly disappeared with the digital era. And I saw the digital realm of infrared, and I'm like, wow, this is interesting. I'm gonna have to check this out and see what I can do, and realized that it was very plausible. It wasn't super expensive to get into, and it allowed me to not only just try something different, but increase my educational learning in the realm of photography. And that's something that I strive to do every day. I'm constantly looking to learn something new in the world of photography. And quite frankly, I should expand that a little bit to include art in general. I study a lot of other types of art, whether it's painting, sculpture, pottery, glass, and I try and draw inspiration from that for the work that I do. So we're gonna dive into this here. Hopefully this is gonna work. I'm gonna apologize about 2 things in advance. One, my images are a little truncated for some reason. They all got squished, but we'll see if it doesn't look too crazy. And secondly, I had a gun go off in my ear about a week ago, so everything I hear sounds like it's coming through tin cans. So if I speak too loud, just, hey, tone it down a little bit, and we'll be good. So a couple of images just to start us off here. Infrared photography in the digital era can also be in color. And you can do some quite striking things with the color side of it. So let's talk a little bit about the history. Yes, sir.
I have a question. Are those images you show totally as out of camera, or have you done post on them?
Post.
Okay.
Post-production. You have to do post-production. Yes. There's no way around it. If you're going to shoot infrared with a digital camera, there will be some element of post-production that you will have to do, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So how did it come about? Why infrared? I mean, can any of you see infrared? No, we cannot see infrared. It is outside the visible spectrum. But it was discovered in the 1800s. Now we're talking about guys that got to say, hey, I was the 1800 era. And that would be what, the 19th century, is that correct? And Sir Frederick Herschel, and he was actually measuring temperature of light spectrum and laid the thermometer down outside of the visible spectrum and realized that he was getting a temperature reading beyond what everything else was showing. So he's proposed to himself, theorized, there must be another wavelength beyond red that is providing temperature. And that's where the process started. Thank you, Mr. Herschel. I went backwards, sorry, here we go. It was first photographed in 1910 by Robert Wood on plate. And by 1930, Kodak had started developing both infrared film for black and white and color in the 60s. Now, for those of you who are children of the 60s, that is a little bit before me. I was born in that era, but how many of you remember album cover art and some of the crazy colors that they had? I want to say like Zappa might have been one of them. I was just actually at a record store today, and I saw some. I think Black Sabbath actually had some of it. And they were actually using what we call these faux colors for album art, or false colors as well. However, it lost popularity with the advent of the digital revolution, and not so much from the digital camera, but you have to remember, even when the very end of shooting film, most everything was getting digitized. You would send your film out, you would get it scanned and digitized. And the post-production process from the digital world, the beginnings of Photoshop, gave us the ability to do a lot of the things and manipulate the images without actually having to shoot the film to get it. In the mid-2000s is when the digital realm of infrared came back, and they had learned that we can now take the bypass cutoff filter out of your digital camera, and we can replace it with the correct filter that we want to shoot, which in this case would be infrared, and now we have a converted infrared camera. Let me get used to these buttons here. Let's see here, and go back one more. Sorry about that. And as I said, now we can get film again in what we call near infrared. Nobody makes true infrared film anymore, but we do have what's called near infrared film. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Dang it, I'll learn these buttons one day. All right, so what is infrared light? Well, actually, I think we should probably say, where is infrared light? So where is it on the spectrum of light? And you have to think about it like this. There are thousands of wavelengths coming at you, wherever you are at. If you're outside, you're inside. It can be light waves, it can be radio waves, it can be microwaves. They all have different frequencies. And this light travels and is collected differently from our eyes and from other sources. We can see visible light, or white light, from about the 400 to the 650 plus sight range, maybe up to 700 is what we actually see. Panchromatic films cover up to about 675. You have some extended panchro or near IR films like the newer ones we're talking about today. And then your variety of bypass filters that we put into the digitally converted cameras. Actually, there are some filters that will go all the way up to 1,000 nanometers. And you can see infrared lives, let's see if I can do this here. Oh, can y'all see that? Kind of lives at the end of the red spectrum and travels way out in here. So it's quite a distance. When you look at the full spectrum of possible wavelengths that can come at us for any given subject, the visible spectrum, like from that wall to that wall, the visible spectrum is about right here. And that's it, from blue to red. Everything else is stuff that we cannot see. So what I'm trying to do, and if you have a converted camera, if you're shooting the film, we're trying to capture the light wave that is beyond what we can see. Out there lives the microwaves. Back here off of the blue lives the UV and the gammas. Infrared remote lives somewhere at about 775. Now, one of the things that I've often questioned is that little red dot truly infrared? Or is it an infrared, or is it just a red laser? Because I can see it, but in the old days, what was the remote on your TV? For those of you who had remotes that were not radio signals, do you remember those? Those were infrared, and they didn't put a dot out. So I'm assuming it was more true infrared light. What do we use infrared for besides art? Well, actually, the scientific community uses it for a lot more. Crop registration, how good is a field of corn growing? The forensics people use it for doing lab work, fingerprinting, things like that. You can see a lot more. How many of you do astrophotography? Anybody in this room? No? Okay. Oh, one person. You can see some things in the infrared realm that you cannot see in the visible spectrum. In fact, I loved it when the James Webb telescope, which is the one that flies around kind of like Hubble, that only sees in infrared. So it's seeing these distant galaxies that, are only producing infrared light. And if you get far enough out on the spectrum, then you will have the thermal side of infrared. So now you're measuring heat, and that's the military. How many of you had night vision? I know in the boating world, which I'm kind of a big part of, we have night vision cameras for that, for being able to see a little bit better. So where does IR light comes from? Well, quite frankly, about 99.9% of the IR light comes from the sun, or the sun's light is reflected off of something else. And it's truly amazing. Now, there are some other things in the human world that will give off some IR light. Some neon will produce some IR light. Some museum lighting will give off a small amount of infrared light. Of course, you have to adjust your exposure properly to be able to capture it. And of course, the moon reflects what? Sunlight. So the infrared light from the sun is actually bouncing off of the moon and shining back down, and that's how we're able to capture it. Your flash will emit a small fraction of infrared light. I was able to capture this image, and this is about as, I hate to use the term, but natural in camera as you can get with the least amount of post-production, if that makes sense to answer part of your question back there. It gives the eyes a very eerie glow. I don't understand the science behind why that is, but I can just tell if you plan to do portraits with infrared, you're just going to get some strange looking stuff. and there are photographers that they focus directly on that. Your flash will put it out, but one of the things we'll talk about later is that the filter that you choose to put in or on your camera will also determine how much visible light you're also capturing. So you'll be capturing both. some visible, some infrared. Why did we switch from film to digital? And that's mainly because there's a lot of difficulties shooting film, infrared film. It required the special filter to be put on the end of the camera. By the way, how many of you have ever shot infrared film? Okay, so we got half a. How many of you shot infrared in a digital camera? In a digital, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, half dozen or so. Okay. So if you've used this filter, you really can't even see through it. Like if you take the filter off the camera and hold it up to your eye, it's pitch black. Well, in honesty, it's dark, dark, dark red, but you really can't see through it. So it becomes difficult for focusing. That means like if you, I think I've actually got it there. I think it's the next line item. If you put it on the end of your lens, then you can't see through it to focus or compose. So you have to do all of that first, then put the filter on the lens. And then if you want to recompose for another shot, you got to take the filter off, then recompose, reset up your camera, focus, and then put the filter back on. So it was just a lot of trouble going back and forth. Secondly, it's very sensitive to heat and light, much more so than most panchromatic films. So you had to load it in your camera in a dark bag or a dark room, and you could not leave it sitting on your front seat in the middle of summer because the heat would expose the film, or as we call fog the film. And lastly, your light meter does not work for infrared, not very well at least. Your light meter, whether it's a handheld, I saw a gentleman, I think it was you, had a handheld light meter, a little Sekonic, or if it's one inside your camera, those are designed to be sensitive to visible light. So that's one of the things we'll talk about is you will have to learn how to interpret your light meter for infrared. Here's a couple of film shots from my early days. These were back in the 90s, and this was in, what is it called? Big Bend, down in the Everglades. Big Cypress National Park. I walked in for about, I don't know, 25, 30 minutes, set up my camera, made that shot, and ran as fast as I could from the mosquitoes. And as you can see, it has this really bright white glowing. And I was still learning photography at this time. This is a little bit newer. This was shot on a newer semi-infrared film we have now. And then somebody asked me earlier about where do I develop my film. I do all of that myself, although there are a couple of labs. This Phototechnica, I see they actually develop film, and then we have a place in Norman that does as well. So what does it involve? Liz just had her camera, or was it, no, I'm sorry, Susan had her camera sent out and converted, and that's essentially what you need. You need a camera that you can send out, and I recommend using a dedicated camera. You don't necessarily have to, but I recommend you using a dedicated camera to send to a company for your first one, for your first time round, and have them convert it for you. You can use point and shoot, a DSLR, or mirrorless, but I'm gonna tell you right now, if you absolutely want the easiest startup possible, you want mirrorless. Period. Hands down, without a question. It doesn't mean you can't use a DSLR, and if you do, make sure it's one that has, what's it called, live preview, I think. I know that's what Nikon called it. I don't know if Canon had a separate name. How many people, just out of curiosity, still use DSLRs? Fair, about half, okay, good. And then same thing for the point and shoot. Probably more modern day point and shoot cameras will be just fine. But I'm always an advocate of manual control. So, you know, get rid of auto, move to manual. And but mirrorless is quite frankly the easiest way to get up and running quickly in infrared. And essentially, you're going to send your camera in, and they're going to take the bypass filter, take your lens off, and right in front of your sensor is what we call a bypass cutoff filter. And the one that comes from the factory is designed to do one thing, and that's block everything outside of the visible spectrum. So we're going to take that out, and we're going to put in a filter of your choice, because you do have a choice, and you can choose what part of the spectrum you want to have included. In other words, reach the sensor and then block everything outside of that. And we can go from this range to this range to this range, or we can be out here in only this range, so there's absolutely no color and only black and white. Oh, I will get to that in just a second. So a couple of things about choosing the right camera. I'm a big proponent, if you're going to shoot digital, shoot RAW. It just gives you the most amount of information for you to be able to use in your post-production process. And when it comes to infrared, you're going to want every nanopixel you can get. I'm not speaking about resolution as much as I am light information. Where are your blacks, where are your highlights and your shadows, your midtones. I recommend setting up custom white balances for your infrared. Usually I do that on a shoot by shoot basis. So if I'm going out, I'm going to take a few photos, I will typically set my white balance either on a specific type of gray card, or I will shoot it a lot of times, quite frankly, just on the green grass on a bright sunny day. And that will be my white balance for that particular shoot. And you'll see it won't vary a whole lot, but a little bit, and is, you know, if you're, and I apologize if I might talk above what your current knowledge is, but we want to be able to break down the color spectrum of the shoot that you're making, or the shot that you're making. So we want to make sure that, are you going to be somewhere around 2000 Kelvin, 3000 Kelvin, 4000 Kelvin, 5000 Kelvin, and how much light's coming in, and being able to shoot in RAW and then do a custom white balance on something that you know is fairly feasible. And green St. Augustine grass on a bright sunny day is a great way to start with a custom white balance. I mentioned live view is important, which is pretty much all mirrorless cameras, I think, all have live view. And then I also recommend a histogram on the display while you're shooting. How many of you use your histogram on a daily basis by shooting? I should see every hand in here raised, because I live and die by the histogram. That's what's telling you what's going to be pure black or what's going to be pure white, and how do you adjust your exposure accordingly. Now, again, as I said earlier, your light meter is not reading infrared light, it's reading visible light. So now you have to make a conscious effort to understand, my light meter is off by X or off by Y, and make a necessary adjustment. You will also find when you're beginning, it's probably the most smartest thing to do is bracket. Bracket a lot. And I would say 2 stops to one side, 1 stop. What the histogram says is, you know, right on target. Another stop, another stop. So like maybe 5 brackets for each shot that you make, until you've learned. And I'll explain, it's not just what your histogram says, but also the subject that you're shooting, because not everything reflects infrared light. Yes, sir.
So if you, I'm assuming since the light meter is not going to be accurate for it, that aperture priority is not going to be accurate either, because it's sort of based upon the meters. So
Correct. Yeah.
Fudge that as well.
I would, you know, again, I highly recommend you learn manual exposure. I mean, you can play with your ISO setting, but I mean, it's essentially aperture and shutter speed. and then adjusting those to see. Now, I will say one other thing about aperture, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later when we get to lenses, because that's an important topic, okay? So having the histogram on the display as you shoot makes it a little bit easier for you to recognize what the exposure should be. And then you have a good infrared lens. Well, what does that mean, Byron? Well, there are good lenses and there are bad lenses for infrared. Now, probably the easiest way to determine that is you go to one of the major manufacturer of infrared filters websites, Kalari Vision, Life Pixel. If somebody else have another name that they recommend or have used? No, those are the two major ones. And they have a list of usable lenses for every manufacturer out there. And they've got good, the bad, and the ugly. So like, don't even think about using this lens because it probably won't work. Here's a good list of lenses. And one of the things that I found encouraging is that it's the lesser expensive lens are the ones that work best for infrared. Hey, yes, sir.
Shutter speed, how we can use it?
I'm sorry, what was it?
Shutter speed.
Shutter speed still applies. We'll talk about that in just a second. The other thing that you will need is, and I recommend, is proprietary software. So for me, when I started, my first camera that was converted was a Nikon. And I got the Nikon Capture DX, I think what was the name of it, or Capture something. And that was the priority software for managing RAW files directly out of a Nikon digital camera. Sony's got the same thing, but they use Capture One, if you're familiar with that particular software. I think Canon has their own software. I'm not a big Canon guy, so somebody will have to help me here on that. There's a number of proprietary softwares, and you don't have to use that software, but it's like the same as shooting JPEG to shooting RAW. If you use the proprietary software, you're just squeezing that much more little bit of information out of your file. And every little bit of information that you can get for infrared helps, because you will find it's a very contrasty art, and it's easy to blow out the highlights, and it's easy to get really muddy, pure black shadows. So trying to get as much information as we can get really helps. So we're talking about lenses here. When you send in your camera to be converted, they're going to ask you what lens you're going to use, and they're going to actually set up a custom calibration for focusing for that lens. Now, this does not apply to mirrorless, but if you're going to use a DSLR, you need to let them know what lens you're going to use. And why is that? How many of you have had the old lens with the red line or the red marks right up here and ever wonder what they're for? That's for shooting infrared film. You set your focus for what you can see, and then right before you shoot, you turn the focus so that the red is where you need it to be for what you had focused as far as footage is concerned. So in other words, you rotated the lens to the red line, and now it's in focus for infrared, because remember, we're talking about a wavelength that is not visible. So therefore, it's a different wavelength. So your lenses will not focus properly for manual lenses or DSLRs. And here's the big issue, and that's aperture. A lot of lenses have hot spots, and that means anything, as you make your aperture smaller or increase the f-stop number, you will start to see a white light in the center of your frame. How do you test this with your camera and lens? Get a gray card and start shooting it and changing the aperture. I find that with the lenses I have, I really can't shoot much over f11. But I'm shooting wide angle, so everything's in focus at f8 anyway. and it doesn't really apply to me. But when you look at the lens databases at the two different websites, this is exactly what's going to show you. It's going to show you your hotspot starts at an F value or an f-stop on the lens. So you don't want to be an aperture or shutter priority, for instance, and allow the camera to pick the aperture, because it may be picking an aperture that's smaller than what you want, and you'll end up with hot spots. Any questions so far? No? Okay.
Will your automatic focus work, or is it you have to do all manual focus?
No, autofocus works. Yeah, and that's why, you know, on a DSLR with live preview and or a mirrorless, you know, you're actually seeing the final image right there on your screen. Now that may be a condensed to JPEG version or whatever they show on the actual screen itself. But if it's in focus on your screen, then your final image is going to be in focus, because it's, my understanding is what you see is what you get. I mean, it's the way mirrorless kind of works. In some of my older DSLRs, I didn't have live preview. So, you know, you'd take a picture, then you'd have to hit play and it wouldn't be in focus. So you kind of have to play with that a little bit, but with my mirrorless, I've never had an issue. So what you see is what you get. To kind of give you an example, anybody here shoot Sony? Only two of us? Oh, brother. We need help. You know, all manufacturers have different kits that they make, you know, so they usually, you buy a body and you get a lesser expensive lens. Oddly enough, for Sony, if you buy the kit lens, which I think is the 16 to 50 for the cropped sensor cameras, those are actually some of the best lenses for using for infrared. They may not be the sharpest lens compared to the very high-end ones, but they don't have a problem with hot spots. Come on. There we go. So, you've got your camera, you're gonna send it in. You have a couple of choices. First off, as I mentioned, internally, we're gonna take the bypass filter out and we're gonna replace it with whatever filter you choose. We'll talk about the different filter choices. Some people ask me, well, what if I just take an infrared filter that I buy it on Amazon and stick it on the end of my camera and take a picture? You're gonna get a very dark, dark, dark red photo. That's all you're gonna get. Doesn't quite work the way, you know, even it would be like putting an infrared filter over panchromatic film. You know, you're not gonna see anything. It's gonna just turn into a red neutral density filter. But here, they do have external filters now, and we'll talk about that a little bit later and why you would choose one versus the other. Here's some of the choices you have. This is from LifePixel, and their different filters that you can choose and some of the effects you get out of them. And you will see, who asked about post-processing, if you don't do post-processing, this is what you get. So you have to do something to make that into a usable photo. So that's why I'm saying there is a minimal amount of post-processing to be achieved. And here's some of the steps that you would go by, whether you want to do a black and white conversion or do a camera swap and kind of give you the blue sky effect as you would have here, a couple of these here. One of the last ones that I think is a little more recent, and that is a full spectrum filter. So this is somewhat unique, and that is you take your camera, you send it in, and you tell them, I want a full spectrum filter. That means your camera sensor sees all light. Visible, infrared, UV, whatever light that your sensor can point at, it's gonna capture that. So then, once you have that on there, you can buy the external filters of the blockage style that you want. So I want to see visible light. Okay, we buy the visible spectrum filter, we stick it on the end of the lens. Oh, now I want my camera to be infrared. We take the visible spectrum filter off the ends of the lens and we put the infrared filter on the end of the lens. So it has pros and cons. The cons being I'm constantly swapping filters, but the pros is I don't have to have a dedicated camera body anymore. I can use the same camera for everything. Personally, I would prefer to have a dedicated camera to this because I'm not, just maybe this is personal, but I've never shot with a UV skylight filter on my camera ever, for any camera I've ever owned. It's just one more thing that gets in the way of the light subject coming through. So anything that I can do to eliminate that, putting the external filters on, I kind of like, okay, I prefer not to do that. But if you like, it's a money thing, which for budget's a big thing for a lot of people, including myself. And I wanted to have one camera that does it all. Full spectrum is the way to go. So now you've got a camera. It came back from the store. It's all converted. You got a lens. That's great. You're ready to go. What do? Practice a lot. Practice a lot. You're going to shoot a lot of stuff. And don't be surprised that you're going to get stuff back that's going to go, oh man, I don't understand. I thought that was going to be a great shot. And then you flip the screen and the next one is like, wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't realize that that was going to be such a great subject, you know? So just be prepared to practice a lot and take notes, because you have to learn what you thought you were going to get versus what you got in reality, and then go back over why do you think that happened. So a couple of things that you want to understand about shooting infrared in general. So the rules. Composition still applies. You still have to have a good shot. Infrared is not going to make you the fantastic photographer you always hoped to be. It's just another tool in your bag. You still have to compose a good image. That means a good subject, good framework, foreground, middle ground, background, everything that applies in composition. Aperture still gives you depth of field. And shutter speed still conveys motion. None of that changes. Did that answer your question, sir, about shutter speed? I don't think you heard me there. And your images still have to tell a story. So all of these things still apply. What does not apply? As I mentioned, your light meter does not necessarily apply. And it's hard for me to tell you individually whether your light meter is going to work, if it's going to be okay, is it going to be semi, is it off in the low side, is it off on the high side? It's going to be different for every single person because we've got so many different cameras and so many different light meters. So you need to learn your histogram as you shoot and take notes. Do a custom white balance. And almost all cameras now, the digital age, have the ability to set a custom white balance. You can also just shoot in RAW, which it captures everything, and then preview your images. So you're out there on the first day. I'm going to give you the best thing about infrared photography for me as a photographer. The last time you want to go out and shoot photography for infrared is not at 6:30 in the morning. It's at 12 noon. How about that? You don't have to wake up early to get really fantastic infrared images. Why? Because we're relying on the sun. We need the sun and the strong the strong infrared rays coming from that sun to produce the effects that we're looking for. And if the sun is just barely creeping over horizon, there's not a whole lot of infrared light coming across your scene. So it just becomes more difficult to capture the infrared look. The other thing is you have to learn what reflects infrared. Not everything reflects infrared like the visible spectrum. The best place to start is green, waxy foliage, palmettos, palm trees, banana leaves, green St. Augustine grass. All of these things give this inherent whitish glow appearance when they're reflecting infrared light. And then bracket your exposure. I would take notes on what you thought the exposure was supposed to be. And then when you actually get through in your computer and you're looking through your post-produced images, say, luckily you can go back and look at your, what's the data on the side, the EXIF data. You can go look at that and say, oh, which image did I choose that looked the best for what I thought I was going to shoot? And record the scene information. I like to make working prints, so I will actually make like a small 5x7 of my final print, and I'll make all my notes on the back of it. That way, if I go back to it, I've got an actual print to work from and say, oh, I'm gonna go shoot something similar to that today. Let me go look to see how I did at that time. Highlights glow. I think most people have seen that in infrared. It's kind of the trademark of infrared. A high key exposure kind of gives this ethereal look, fairy tale land. However, you have to be careful because a 1 or 2 stop overexposure will completely blow out the highlights. And a 1 to 2 stop underexposure will make recovery of the shadows near impossible. They'll just look muddy. And the last thing I would say is do not necessarily expect super sharp photos. It's not because your lens isn't sharp or you didn't focus properly. It's because the highlights of infrared glow. They put out this, this almost like, I'm trying to think of another word for it. Help me here. Luminescence, thank you very much. And, if you look, excuse me, like right in this area here, well, it's kind of hard on the screen because it's the texture of the material, but this area does not look sharp and necessarily in focus, but there's a lot of glowing going on, whereas in here, the image was very sharp, which, probably was a distance of about 15 feet, but I'm standing somewhere at about 50 to 60 feet away. So at f8, everything would have been in focus at that point. So post-production software. You can use Lightroom, you can use Photoshop, Sony Capture One, the Nikon Capture NX, that was the one I was thinking of. Canon, the Fuji has X-RAW, and then there's a new one, I guess, On One. Does anybody use that? You do? Okay. You play with it? Okay, I'm not as familiar with it. But you definitely want to make sure the software that you're using has the ability to take full advantage of the raw files that you're working on. You don't want to leave anything out. In fact, when I was shooting my Nikon camera, I would actually take the images into the Nikon Capture NX, and I would download them into that software, make my white balance corrections, and if I decided to do a swap, and then I would send them to Lightroom. Excuse me. Now my camera is Sony. So I've actually worked my step by step a little bit different, my workflow. I actually import everything into Lightroom first and save all of my raw files as they came right out of camera, right in a folder in Lightroom, and I categorize everything of all my shoots by date. And then I actually go into Sony Capture One and import the images again, make my corrections on the raw files, and then send them to the same folder as the original raw files. That way, both the original file and the corrected file are all together. And what you're going to end up with is you're going to have, in this case, a Sony AERW file, I think they are, and then I'll end up with a TIFF, which is the corrected version. If I was doing it in Photoshop, you'd end up with a Photoshop file, and they would be side by side. That way you can look at the raw file and you can look at the corrected file side by side. Any questions? I see a lot of blank stares. Are people lost, confused, disinterested? So here's an observation I made. I shouldn't say recent because this was actually a couple of years ago. I was walking through the woods in Matanzas State Park, and they had done a controlled burn, and I just happened to be on the edge of the fire line. And this is where one half of a small pine tree had gotten burnt and the other half had not. And here just goes to show you, I just said green waxy foliage works the best for producing infrared reflection. But even the burnt leaves, or burnt needles, put off a fair amount of infrared light. So these are the things you have to learn. Some metallic objects that have been painted do not put off as much infrared light as you would think. Certain types of wood will put off more infrared light than others. And we may be talking a one-stop difference, but sometimes that one stop is all that you need to make the subject pop. One of the choices that was on the list of filters for LifePixel is they term their super color. I think Kalari has their very similar version where you can get, or actually multiple versions of getting color. And essentially, you have got a filter in your camera that is collecting both some visible and some infrared. And we're combining the two, and it gives us this, quote, false color. In order to achieve the look like we have on the right, you have to do what's called a channel swap. You're more or less telling the software to take the red channel and make it blue, and take the blue channel and make it red. Or in the case of Nikon, it was blue and orange. So it really depends on the camera that you're using and the filter that you're using. But we swap that. We do that for a more realistic look because the sky is not always orange or red. If we want to change it and make the sky blue, we have to do that color swap. But you can get some really pretty images from using filters like this. Now, in this particular case, this one was their Super Color 740. So that means it more or less cut off the wavelength at 740 nanometers. So that's the raw file. There it is brought into the capture, Nikon capture software. And then in Lightroom, I converted it to black and white. Now, I could have done the conversion in the Nikon software. I could have done the black and white in Photoshop. It doesn't really matter. It's whatever you feel comfortable with at that point. But what's important is getting from here to here. And that's where having the proprietary software do that, and using raw data from your camera. Here is a different filter on my Sony. As you can see, the raw data is a little bit different in color. With the Nikon, it was more orange. And here it's actually more violet and pink. So we've actually moved a little bit further up the spectrum. We did the, whoop, dang it, didn't mean to do that. We have done the conversion here in the proprietary software and then converted to black and white. This was a horrible photo to do black and white in, but it was a good example of the process. And then you just practice a lot. I mean, I can't reiterate that enough. I mean, I can't, thousands of images I've shot that were just throwaways. They're just like, okay, I gotta learn this, I gotta learn this, I gotta learn this. And I've actually become pretty methodical now, going back to the film because film is so expensive. I don't clip the shutter nearly as much. And so I find that when I shoot and practice, if I walk away from a good afternoon of shooting a digital camera, I've probably got 30 files to look at. You know, I'm not the, because I don't have the time to sit there and look at every file. Granted, I'm not doing sports. That's a whole different realm. So it definitely has slowed me down and I don't have as much to edit, but I did have to shoot a lot in order to get where I'm at with infrared. We do it on time. So now I'm just going to show you a few pictures in both color and black and white, and some of the imagery that you can achieve. What's going on here? Great for architecture. I will tell you, one of the things that I find with infrared is it's a very contrasty process. So I tend to find I'm using the decontrast slider more than anything else in the digital realm, to try and bring it back into a larger gray tonal scale. Those are real white cows. I didn't do that. They're 100% purely white. I'd never seen them before. That was on a farm in Georgia. That ethereal glow. This is oak leaves, or scrub oaks surrounding this old pine. And the sun, as you can see, was probably at about, I think, if I remember it, somewhere at around 11:30 in the sky. So it was like right up about here. So I'm getting all of this infrared light just showering down upon the canopy. It does a great job if you've got light spilling through the canopy onto certain, on the floor ground of the forest area to really accentuate the leaf patterns around dark subjects. There's your palmettos and the resurrection fern really glowing. People, I've done, in fact, there might be an image in here, I don't remember, of a scene in the Carolinas and everybody claims, is that snow on the ground? I'm like, no, that's hay. It's just, it glows. And this is a pecan field in probably, I want to say August in Georgia. And it, you know, just has that, it had a lot of green grass on the ground, so it just very much glowed. Kanapaha State Gardens, who's been there? Anybody? It's a great place to visit. Actually, it's pouring rain right there. And my opinion is that that's what created this glow. There's the snow scene. That is not snow. That is a freshly cut field. Actually, there is texture in that image. It's not on the screen here, though. Famous house in Georgia. Who's driven the Woodpecker Trail and seen this? Anybody? No? Wow. You gotta, if you make it to South Georgia, Florida Georgia line, you pick up the Woodpecker Trail and you just head north into the mountains and let Google be your guide. It works great at night. You still get that kind of ethereal look. It's probably one of my more recent color images. Rhododendrons glow like crazy. Here I left the color in. And fog helps to accentuate that. We've seen that image already. The red brick road, how many people know about that? Oh wow, we could do a history lesson in this class. That predates US 1. That is original red brick road that was planned to go from Michigan to Miami of red bricks, and went defunct at about the time they started building US 1, but they actually had cities planned around this. This section of it, which portions of it still survive, you can still see some of the red bricks in here, goes from Espanola, which is Bunnell, north to the southern line of St. Johns County. And you can still drive it, but don't steal a brick. I do a lot of state parks. This is Favorite Ike State Parks. This one, oddly enough, I did get up early for, and this was sunlight over Matanzas Inlet. This is a series of 6 images, and I'm actually shooting into the sun in this particular case, but the fog was so thick. First time in my life I've ever experienced fog rolling in and rolling out. So in a course of about an hour, the fog rolled in and out about 5 times. So I would get covered up and then it would go away and you could see the beach. Then you'd come back in and it'd go back out. I left on purpose the bridge so people could could see a point of reference.
Here.
Yes,
Here. No, it's a bridge. Oh, it's a
bridge. Ravine Gardens, how many of you visited there? Great. It's a beautiful park. This one is taken to so this is an infrared image, and I actually printed it in palladium. Another one that local boat ramp down in St. Augustine, and this one was printed in palladium as well. But you can see what shines from the sun glowing on a subject and what doesn't. All the mangroves in the background were all well lit, and it does wonders for clouds. As you can see here, Matanzas Inlet. This one we called Cloud Moon Boat because I saw the cloud coming from behind me, waiting for the boat to spin and face right at me, and then after I took the shot, I realized the moon was in there as well. I mentioned I do shoot in film. This is semi-infrared film. In other words, you're going to see some visible spectrum, you're going to get some infrared spectrum. And it comes in 35 and 120 millimeter format. A couple of quick images from that. And the best thing about this is processing infrared film is no different than processing any other black and white film. Yes, sir.
What do you have to do with your camera to adapt to that film room?
Nothing.
Nothing.
You have to have an infrared filter on the end of your lens. Yeah, you have to have that IR filter. So you set everything up, you get the focus, get the composition, get your exposure, calculate for filter factor, put your filter on. If there's reciprocity factor, include that as well. Shoot, take your filter off, start all over. Oops, wrong way. Princess Place, I do a lot of photography in there. This is a creek, or I should say a ravine in my neighborhood. And then Rolly makes one for 4x5 sheets, which I do a fair amount of 4x5 work. Running out of time here. This is Pellisier Creek. Princess Place is right there. This is Favor Dyke State Park. High Falls in North Carolina, Cashiers area. I love pine needles, just absolutely glow. It's wonderful. Here I used a variable density filter to block down some of the light on the foreground so it wasn't so bright. Using a little slow shutter speed for that motion. A little abstract art. That's it. Thank you. Yep. Questions?
What about hot objects like fire? How do they expose?
I'm sorry, what's it?
So if you have a real hot object like a fire,
A fire, yes.
how do those things expose?
It will, it will not give you the colors that you're expecting. And I would tend to underexpose for fire so that your highlights, you're already going to get highlights that are going to want to overexpose. So I would tend to well underexpose for fire. I haven't shot a lot of it, but a few things that I have, like the embers and coals, they just turn pure white.
Yeah, because I go to Hawaii a lot and shoot lava, so I was wondering what that was.
It's worth practicing, finding out. Any other questions? No, great. I will leave some of my cards if anybody, yes. Okay. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me or call me. I have a website and I have several Facebook pages. I'm in Butterfield Gallery in St. Augustine, Arts on Douglas in New Smyrna, and I think that's about it. So, thank you. Butterfield Garage, which is on